Oi, oi, it's your boy, Slacky J. We're coming at you on Monday, the 16th of May. Yeah, May. Post UFC Rakic versus Blachowicz. Now, we got some fights to talk about, and some of them are pretty good, and some of them are pretty. Biggest moment of the entire weekend was Andrea Lee's corner being a bit xenophobic. Andrea Lee thought she'd been gouged in the eye or something like that, went back to her corner and said, she thumbed me. And Tony Kelly, who you'll remember as the nutter who drove 20 hours to avoid a 1-hour flight wearing a mask. But he did win that fight, to be fair. He was like, well, they're dirty fucking Brazilians. They're going to do that. And to be fair, the Brazilian tap is a very real stereotype. There is a stereotype of cheating amongst Brazilians. But he did double down on it being like, this is cancel culture. You're like, no one was trying to cancel you. No one said cut you. No one said take your sponsors away or whatever. They already did, lol. That is cancel culture, taking away people's advertisers. And the UFC have already done that to all their own fighters. But Andrea Lee very much has a type. If you don't know about her ex-husband who murdered a dude and had all the tattoos and stuff, definitely look into that. But, you know, what I'm saying is, however you look at it, Tony Kelly's probably a step up from that. Why do all these racists in my corner keep saying racist shit? Why do all these homos keep sucking my dick? But the fact that that honestly very small incident sort of overtook the weekend tells you some of the shortcomings on this card, mainly the main event. The main event was arse because it was two light heavyweights, and light heavyweight is a bad division. I wrote an article in the post-fight, Slacky's secret post-fight notes. Go look at it if you're a Patreon boy. But yeah, not a lot of it was about this fight, the main event. Really, like, you're watching these two, and both of them are throwing calf kicks. One guy is taking 40% of the calf kicks. One guy is taking 90% of the calf kicks. And the guy who took 90% of the calf kicks ended up losing. You know, in my article, I basically wrote, like, it's very easy to feel annoyed at people who do well in this shitty division. You know, watching Jan Blachowicz throw exactly the same left hook to the body, right straight upstairs combination about 12 times while running really does make you think, God, this division's shit. But that's not Jan Blachowicz's fault. It's Alexander Rakic's job to punish him for doing the thing that is obviously punishable. You know, if you're going to do the same thing 12 times in a row with nothing else in between, that's punishable because you can see it coming and you know it's coming. If you're going to lead with a left hook to the body, you have to move in closer than you do for a jab or a cross, and you have to like put your head in range to do it, and you have to drop your hand before you even land your punch. So Rakic's job there was to stand his ground and throw a right straight, but all Rakic wanted to do was move in on his turn and then run away on Blachowicz's turn. It was the most basic level of striking, that like, my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn. And those are the fights that Blachowicz wins, because he just gets into ugly kickboxing matches. He lands at a good clip, to be honest, against most of these opponents. And when they throw at him, you know, it is ugly as hell watching him like lean back and reach at the same time to parry things. But he's very tricky to hit for a lot of people. You know, Israel Adesanya had a very hard time hitting him, and he is a legitimately very skilled technical striker. But everyone felt let down by the ending because the way that Rakic retreats all the time meant that he threw his weight back on his rear leg. It probably helped that he'd been kicked in the lead leg a lot because his balance was sort of off and he was sort of limping while trying to jump backwards. But his leg just, his top part of his leg and his bottom part of his leg just slipped off each other briefly, and he damaged his knee and collapsed. It is unfortunate. You know, you've seen quite a few of them, like Patrick Cote against Anderson Silva. He was doing fine, and then he just decided to hop on one leg randomly, and his leg, you watched the shin and the thigh move in opposite directions, and then he fell on the floor. And I expect it's going to be more likely if you are a gigantic man trying to leap backwards too. Not saying don't leap backwards in fights, not saying don't retreat in fights. I'm saying it was unfortunate. But most of Rakic's problems in this fight stemmed from an inability to work when it was Blachowicz who was leading. And not checking kicks. Fuck's sake. Everyone knows about the calf kick now. So that was that. Main event out of the way. Let's talk about the good stuff on the card, because there were a couple of absolute bangers. Katlyn Chookagian somehow had a banger. Truly incredible. Amanda Ribas, if she's not the future of women's MMA, she's certainly one of the best things about women's MMA because she got a good fight out of Katlyn Chookagian. It was very funny watching Katlyn Chookagian talk about how, like, she's not going to get hit with the head and arm throw. And you're like, it's women's MMA, mate. I don't think you can't. I don't think you have it in you to not get hit by the head and arm throw. And almost immediately, Amanda Ribas hits the head and arm throw and then sits in the top of a scarf hold while Katlyn Chookagian's, like, taking her back. It's just standard women's MMA at the highest level. But on the feet, like, it was... Obviously, Chookagian was better on the feet, but both of them were throwing jab and then right straight, leaning forward at the waist with your elbow above your head as you throw the right straight. Betch Kohea punching form. And Amanda Ribas' problem is really that she walks forward trying to be aggressive because that's what you need to do if you aren't the experienced striker and you want to actually land some straight strikes and create some clinches and stuff. But her head never moves off the centre line and she doesn't parry or block any punches. So she's just walking forward, feeding Chookagian successful strikes. But they got fight of the night, and that pissed me off because Davy Grant versus Lewis Smolka was fight of the night. But we'll get onto that in a minute. Ryan Spann versus Ion Cutelaba in the co-main event. The best kind of Ion Cutelaba fight. The one where... Actually, I didn't see anything that he did before the fight because he does... I'm giving him the nickname Cringe Machismo because Jay Lethal was Black Machismo. Ion Cutelaba gets to be Cringe Machismo because he always does something incredibly cringe at the weigh-in and then before the fight as they're announcing the names. And then he does something really stupid and loses. But this one he managed to lose in the first round, which is always impressive because he's so strong in the first round. If you watch his fight with like Glover Teixeira, the first round he just murks Glover Teixeira and then suddenly he gets tired and falls over. But this puts him with 1 win in his last 4, which is a bit rough. I mean, he did lose that first Ankalaev fight for pretending to be hurt, but then you're asking a lot of the ref if you want him to stop the fight when someone's hurt, but also then pretend to be hurt. That was very, very silly. But anyway, he gets to work against Spann. Spann actually looked pretty fast and on point with his hands, and Cutelaba's trying to take him down. Spann scrambles up and Cutelaba immediately jumps headfirst into a guillotine. And it was that double enclosure we're always talking about, the John Danaher principle. The wrist was not under the windpipe. The wrist was all the way through so that the neck was in the V of the bicep. The windpipe was in that crook. And those are the really nasty chokes, like that one-handed one last week in the Royval fight. I think someone on Reddit put it best where they said Ryan Spann tried his hardest to be crap and he still was too much for Ion Cutelaba. Oh, man. Light heavyweight. Just any card where it's like the top 2 fights are light heavyweight. I know they're going to be bad. But what was good? Michael Johnson versus Alon Patrick. That was a heart-warmer because, you know, Michael Johnson... But this was a good fight from Johnson. He was staying bouncy on his base. You heard Henry Hooft ask him for little steps. And then any time that he started walking across the ring, like to walk... Patrick down. You know, like when he hurts someone and then you walk across the ring looking cool. That was what Henry Hooft was trying to stop him from doing because that's when he's going to get hit. He's saying, like, small steps, stay on your stance. And then it was just, like, fading away, coming back with left straights and 1-2s. Or 3-2s, you know, he'll do, like, a slappy right hook. And Alon Patrick was kicking from just really bad positions to kick. He was throwing these front kicks from right in front of Johnson, and Johnson was just slapping them offline. So it was like Gustafsson versus... Rumble. If someone slaps your front kick offline and you're so close that it's going to go right through them, you're really in trouble. You've basically given them a dominant angle without them having to move. So that's how he hammered him a couple of times. There were a couple of low kicks that Patrick attempted from way too close in. It was pretty good because for the most part, Patrick couldn't and wouldn't try to box with Johnson, so Johnson just had to stay on the end of his own reach, ready to step in if Patrick threw kicks. But even then, Johnson managed to almost snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, as he loves to do, because he kept going for a body jab with no setup. So he'd just look down at the guy's body, lunge in and punch downwards, which is real dangerous. One, because you want to punch level with your shoulder on a body jab. You want to get low, punch level with your shoulder so that your shoulder's nice and high, and you can roll down behind it if the opponent throws back. But 2, like, the way people should be using the body jab is like you jab to the head and then you show the shoulder to the head, you give him a shoulder fake and you step in and jab to the body. You don't ever just look at the body and jab it. And he did it and got hit with a right hand across the top or a left hand across... I think it was right hand across the top. Standard counter, because it was just so obvious. He got hit the first time doing it because there was no subtlety to it or no trick to it. and he got stunned by it pretty badly. And then he went back to it later the same way, and Henry was just like, don't do that. But the thing about the body jab is that is what you want. The body jab is taught, or dealing with the body jab in most gyms is taught as, don't block the body jab, because then you're just creating openings in other places. Instead, you try and counter the body jab with like a right hand across the top, as Patrick did. And if you watch someone like Gustafsson against Jones, or Junior Dos Santos is the example I'm always going to use, but he would be using the body jab until the opponent was punching back at him when he lowered his level, and then he'd start swinging across the top. If the guy's answer to you is the one thing you know it's going to be, exploit that. Use the body jab to exploit that. Don't just be like, I wonder if I can get another body jab off without him punching me in the head. But then Patrick's limited success there on the feet, having hurt Johnson, might have played into getting the stoppage, actually, because he was trying to, in the second round, he was just sort of trying to punch and then reach for Johnson's leg, and Johnson would pull the leg back and start punching from like a square position, and Patrick would run past him or whatever. But he did about 3 times in a row up to the stoppage. He just sort of like wade in and try and reach down for the leg. And Johnson threw like a 4-punch flurry back, chinned him with the last one, knocked him down, got the stoppage, which was really nice. Love to see it. Because the last time I saw Johnson looking really good was against Thiago Moises, I think, where he cut the cage on him, beat him up against the cage for the entire first round, and then Thiago Moises dived on a straight ankle lock in the second round. And you're like, how? How did that happen? Andrea Lee versus Viviane Araujo, we talked about briefly, but man, chin on Viviane Araujo, because Andrea Lee dropped her with a right straight, I think it was, in the first round, and then as she bounced up off the mat to be like, I'm not hurt, she got kicked in the head and took that full brunt as well. And then just, had a really rough first round, came out for the second, hit Lee with a really good left hook to the body, which I think a lot of people missed, because it was like, why did Lee dive on just the worst takedown attempt you've ever seen when she was clearly winning the striking? And that was she dived on like a low single, and Araujo just pulled her leg away and was on the top of the sprawl, and then ran around to her back and beat her up for the rest of the round. And that was sort of the downhill spiral for the rest of the fight for Lee. But it was the left hook to the body, I believe, that did it. There was a really nice one. And Lee throws a couple of punches back, and then just all the air goes out of her, like a little bit of a delayed reaction. And she backs up onto the fence and does this really bad shot. But honestly, a decently fun fight for a women's... Is that 125, was that? Well, it was a fun fight, anyway. Nick Maximov versus Andrei Petroski was very funny, because Maximov had been such a handful for his last opponent, just that head on the outside single and the crackdown over and over again. And this guy just goes, why is no one just guillotining you? And they did. Well, actually, no, it was an anaconda choke he actually ended up finishing with it. But, I quite like Maximov just because I like people who don't have the attributes of a good fighter, but still manage to make it work by grindiness and technique and stuff. But I also do like watching people who are Diaz adjacent lose. But it was a good submission. Eyes on Petroski. He looks interesting. What else was good? I mean, my post-fight article was largely about Alan Nascimento versus Jake Hadley, because he looked fantastic. He had Oliveira in his corner, but real shades of Oliveira in this fight. Just, we're always talking about how he has some of the most effective jiu-jitsu for MMA, or grappling for MMA, in the world. And again, we're always talking about Charles Oliveira using his leg locks well. And people, when you have the people who are like, leg locks don't work in MMA, you're going, well, they do, they're just not going to show up on any stats. Charles Oliveira is constantly getting out from underneath people, or sweeping to top position, or stalling for time when he's hurt by using leg attacks. And Alan Nascimento here in the first round gets... Jake Hadley managed to get an omoplata from bottom position after Nascimento took him down, sweeps to top position. Nascimento enters on an outside ashi, ends up hip rolling back to a more normal sort of leg entanglement. Hadley comes up on top of him, he spins under for the calf slicer, just like Charles Oliveira is always going for. Calf slicer, you are almost never going to finish. It's insane that Charles Oliveira managed to finish one. But what it does do is it takes the opponent over your head. You've gone basically under and between their legs and come up behind them. And Nascimento managed to roll into top position while doing this and come up in Hadley's closed guard. Then the rest of the fight was Nascimento passing the half guard. And what I really loved about this was that Hadley was When you're passing around or trying to force half guard, you're trying to change it from a guard where the guy's on his side with his legs involved and he's able to work, to a pin where the guy's flat on his back and you're on top of him. And that can all happen while he's still got one of your legs. So the half guard is both a guard and a pin. And as the top man, you want to make it a pin. And as the bottom man, you want to keep it as a guard. And the difference most of the time is if the guy can grab your head from top position, he can smush you back down. So Hadley's constantly fighting with both hands on Nascimento's cross-facing hand, pushing it away. And then Nascimento's digging these knees to the body from half guard. How often do you see knees to the body on the ground? I mean, Oliveira does it, yeah, but almost no one is doing it because people like their legs to be doing the holding them up and their hands to be doing the hitting. But if the guy's fighting your hands, digging that knee to the body is just perfect. And also, part of flattening someone down from half guard is getting your knee in their hip pocket, basically. But Nascimento's like punching him in the head. When he's defending his head, he's kneeing him in the body. When he's holding Nascimento's wrist, he's putting his knee over Hadley's wrist and pinning it to the floor so he can punch his head more or grab his head and pin him. When Hadley got an underhook, he puts his hand underneath Hadley's butt so Hadley can't get out behind him and then flattens him out again. Really awesome stuff. Again, did loads of diagrams of it and stills of it in the post-fight article. But I was really impressed by Nascimento. I mean, I think I wrote that his striking was like a poor imitation of Oliveira, but his grappling was a pretty good emulation of him. And Hadley wasn't bad either. Like it wasn't he was getting smashed on the ground. That was why so much of it took place in half guard, because Nascimento wanted to flatten and pin him and get to mount or the back, and Hadley was doing a decent job of shrimping, creating space and trying to get back to his hip and get an underhook and build up. But one of the main takeaways was the underhook. Jake Hadley was constantly, even if he's in closed guard, he opened his guard, went to half guard of his own accord and dug the underhook to try and sit up on a single leg or a get up. And that is one of the most reliable ways to get up in MMA. But if you're good at killing the underhook, and there's a few ways of killing the underhook, you can like put your head over their elbow so they can't lift you. You can backstop them so they can't slide out from underneath you. So a couple of ways of doing that are like you reach back and you put your the web between your thumb and index finger in their armpit so that they can't get out from underneath you properly. Or as Nascimento was doing in this one, he reached all the way back and put his hand under Jake Hadley's arse so that Jake Hadley couldn't move his arse back. And his head was underneath Hadley's. Yeah, it was just perfect. Really good. There was a wrestling coach called Ray F. Carson who wrote a book called Counter Control. And he was just like, everything the opponent does, you have to do something to counter their control so that they can't then use it. And this was a great example of counter control, especially against like traditional get-ups. Very effective get-ups that work still at the highest levels. Manuel Torres versus Frank Camacho was sad because I love Frank Camacho. But Torres had a few inches of height and reach on him, and it was just a perfect time with Frank Camacho constantly getting down, crouching down, bending down into his stance, into his own chest. Torres was able to say, "Guess who's going to jail tonight?" Hit him with a bus driver uppercut, and then spam some 1-2s along the fence and knocked him down. That's 3 on the trot being finished by Camacho. And 4 out of his last 5. God, he got head kicked by Jeff Neal. I just remembered that, man. Dude has taken some punishment. He's getting bonuses and things, but I really hope it's worth it for him because he's given his a good amount of his brain to this business to be just a really entertaining, reliable main card / undercard kind of guy. Tatsuro Taira was an interesting guy. I was saying on Twitter I'd love like a MMA revolution in Okinawa, home of karate, and karate was just kung fu and shit that they collected from other places. They just really liked martial arts down there. So it'd be really nice if they had like a little Japanese MMA revolution in Okinawa. But Taira, people have been hot on him for a while. This fight was supposed to happen a few weeks ago, and I think Candelario got ill. But looked good in the striking and very good on the mat, actually. He was all over this lad. But Candelario gave a good account of himself, I felt. Like, he gave up his back, but he didn't look in a lot of danger for most of it. It was just a really good, solid, high-pace flyweight fight with good technical work in it. It's what you expect from the flyweights at this point. And then talking of divisions that are reliable, bantamweight. I don't think we're even in the top 15 now, but you cannot make a bad fight at bantamweight. Davey Grant versus Louis Smolka. I said in the week leading up to this is the good fight on this card, and it turned out to be the good fight on this card. They got robbed of fight of the night But really interesting story. I wrote a little bit about it in the post-fight notes, but I left some of it because I wanted to talk more about it at length in this podcast. Davy Grant, obviously wicked hitter, does that very weird sort of punching style where he it's like he's flapping his arms. They're straight and he's swinging them in from the side. But it does really hurt people. And I was saying against Chito Vera, he was let down a bit by not using the normal tools enough in between his swinging, not throwing the good straight punches, the good jabs and things. And this one, what really made the difference was that, well, while Grant was the big hitter and was cracking him with these big swings and things, and those nasty kicks just out in the open, a lot of it was him jabbing to start his combinations or counter Smolka coming in and then continue swinging off it. And his movement was really good in this fight. I mean, Dom Cruz was talking about it constantly, but it wasn't like Jose Aldo. There weren't really clean technical boxing pivots. But if you watched him, like Lewis Smolka would come in, he'd meet him with the jab, and then he'd slide down to his left side of Smolka and throw the right hand like a big swing. But then he'd be at a 90-degree angle to where he started, and he'd come up swinging. Smolka would cover up and try and turn to face him, and he'd front kick him away. And he was always doing that. Like, he'd throw a good rally of punches, a good salvo, and turn Smolka. And as Smolka turned to face him, he'd either disengage or he'd push him away, sometimes with both hands, sometimes with a push kick. Sometimes he'd low kick him as he turned. And that was something that I saw in Smolka in this one. He was trying to use low kicks, and it was a good idea to, but he was often leading with the low kick. And with Grant moving the way he was, the time to hit him with the low kick was get him moving with some punches, or get him moving by trying to move into the clinch as Smolka was trying to do. And as he turns out, hammer the leg. It was how Frankie Edgar got a load off on Jose Aldo and then just stopped doing it. Or Rob Whittaker did to Uriah Hall. If a guy is going to pivot around that lead leg or start circling off, there's always... If he's circling off, you kick the rear leg, the one that's trailing. If he's pivoting, you kick the one that's planted there on the floor, turning, where you can smack his knee or jar his knee as he's turning. But Smolka in the first round was trying to, he'd throw a cross counter across the top and try and move into a clinch. And the reason it wasn't working was that Grant was constantly turning him. If Grant were just moving straight back, like a lot of fighters do, and you don't notice it until you see someone moving well, you don't notice how big a deal it is. But lesser fighter or Davy Grant on a worse night where he's not thinking about it would have been moved straight back onto the fence and wound up in a clinch off a lot of these exchanges. But because his back was his back was facing the camera 1 minute and then facing the other side of the arena the next, every exchange he just turned him around completely. Very hard to just push him straight back onto the fence. But then in the second round, Smolka actually gave a good account of himself. It started landing punches of his own. Obviously not as big a hitter as Grant. Firstly, because he's been down to flyweight before. He's not as big a man as Grant. But also Grant really does try and take people's head off with every punch. But Smolka managed to land a couple of short punches that really hurt him. And then he was doing up elbows with his lead hand and then following with just a normal elbow or a round elbow, whatever you want to call it, with his rear hand. And he actually hit him with a couple, 1-2. In sequence, and I must have seen it at some point, but I very rarely seen that, landing 2 elbows in combination, because you're doing so much work to get into elbow range anyway. It's not a comfortable clinching range. It's not a comfortable punching range. To be there and stay there is very tricky to do. So to be there for 2 strikes in sequence is very rare. Reminded me of Nate Corbett on the pads, because he used to do all these combinations of elbows. He was convinced that the secret to landing elbows was not to try and clinch fight with them, but to use them as boxing weapons. But in the first round, Lewis Smolka gets hit with a jab. They were calling for Grant to split his jab, and that's what he was doing. Every time Smolka came in, he took his head offline to the right a little bit and threw his own jab, caught Smolka stepping in. You see a lot of guys get dropped with those in MMA because you're putting your whole weight into it, especially if you're pursuing a clinch. And Smolka got dropped. Grant dives into the top of half guard to start trying to finish him. Smolka underhooks the leg, puts his knee across Grant's belly and pushes him back. And as Grant pushes back into him, he goes underneath him and goes into a single leg X, which is the Craig Jones classic, Craig Jones' favourite entry, because that's a Craig Jones move that won't get you disqualified in a competition that bans heel hooks. And then Grant did the right thing by trying to step off Smolka's leg. And as he did, Smolka wheeled into the calf slicer again, and the calf slicer turned Grant away. It's what we're always talking about with things like the knee reap and the calf slicer, is that they turn the guy's knee away from you. And it's one of those ones where if you go with it, it's fine. You're going okay, cool, I'll slip out. but you can't punch someone hard while your knee's pointing in the opposite direction, and that's the real value of this stuff. If you remember Tony Ferguson versus Lando Venata, gets really badly hurt, entangles a leg, and it's just impossible for Venata to really get on top of him and start hitting him properly. He has to unwind the legs first, and then you've bought time to get that breather and recenter yourself. I don't know what it's called, but like clear your head a bit. And I think that was the difference between Smolka getting finished in the first round and getting into the third round as he did here. That leg entanglement into calf slicer really did stop Davy Grant from landing anything for about 20, 30 seconds in that round, where Smolka had been in really serious trouble. But it's actually a good low kick from Grant in the third round, right at the start. Just hammered Smolka in the lead leg, put him down, and he finished him on the ground. A very impressive finish. Really fun fight. I think it should have got fight of the night, but sadly did not. But very impressed by Davy Grant, because he was still doing the wide swinging stuff, but the straight punches were there. He threw like a lovely right straight to the body at one point. He threw a right straight to the body, came up with a left hook to the head, and then he turned 180 degrees around Smolka and shoved him off because he was trying to get the clinch. Really nice. It's like I always say about Rob Whittaker and people like that. You want to do about 70% orthodox, well, not even 70%, but you really want to get a balance between normal shit or boring shit, as I suspect Davy Grant thinks it is, and the weird shit. Because there's nothing like, no one's saying don't throw weird swinging shit. I'm not that kind of person. I'm not a strict boxing coach or anyone like that who's going to go, never do that. But I am going to say the weird shit works much better mixed in with the normal shit. And the normal shit works much better mixed in with the weird shit. I always remember Fedor in his book. I like to start with a right-hand lead because no one expects it. And then I like to go to the 1-2 because no one expects a guy who's just thrown a right-hand lead to throw a 1-2. Is that the whole fucking card? We've done the whole card. God, that was a bit of a uneventful one then. But Bellator had an event as well, and they had Logan Storley versus Michael Page. I told you this one was going to suck because I'd said it multiple times in the week leading up to this. This is a guy who gets takedowns at a really high rate, at a really high level, but can't pass the guard and can't hit against people who can play guard. And Michael Page is a guy who will hold the guy in guard but can't get up. So this whole fight was spent either in top of guard or just like Logan Storley on Page's legs along the fence as Page is like sitting up but not really able to get up to his feet. It was dreadful. It happened in London, so they someone still managed to give Page the decision. Logan Storley won the split, but it was dreadful. So dreadful even that Scott Coker came out and shat on his own fighters, which is something that Scott Coker isn't really known for. Co-main event was Fabian Edwards versus Lyoto Machida. Before the fight, Fabian Edwards, there were news stories coming out of him being like, I don't want to hear a word about how old Lyoto Machida is. You're like, why take the fight then? He's 45 years old. But in this fight, he did what he should have done. He didn't get into like a long-range striking contest with Machida. He, close to the clinch, on the break, he hit him with an elbow. And he went, oh, that's not good, that Lyoto Machida's answer to that was just to take it. And then again, he did it moments later and knocked Machida out. I mean, it's such a game changer because I've seen Edwards fight before and he's never like blown me away. But that was the case with Leon Edwards before he discovered how to elbow out of the clinch and how to make clinches and break from clinches. And he just brutalizes people there now. It's such a blind spot in MMA. You know, people know it exists. People know they should be exiting with elbows and stuff. But Leon Edwards has made such a specialty out of it that he just murders people there. Even guys like Gunnar Nelson. You know, he gave Gunnar Nelson the underhook and then he head posted and stretched him out to the point that Gunnar Nelson's like standing side on upright, trying to crab walk his way in on this underhook that's just not there. It's really just tying him to Edwards with his hands out of position to protect himself. And Edwards is just slicing him up with elbows. But it was cool to see Fabian Edwards do a little bit of Leon Edwards. Sad to see Lyoto Machida get knocked out, but at this point, man, I know he could fight Gegard Mousasi tomorrow, and he'd probably still have a split decision win or loss over Gegard Mousasi because Mousasi doesn't want to like engage him. But yeah, he doesn't really need to fight anymore. He should just be like ambassador to karate combat, like Bas Rutten and George St. Pierre. Paul Daly got an awesome knockout over a guy called Wendell. A guy called Wendell, that's all you need to know. But Wendell was all over him on the ground, got on his back. Paul Daly kept doing the classic MMA escape of turning back into the guy and ending up in closed guard. But Wendell managed to really tire himself out. So Paul Daly gets out of back control and disengages in round 2. And Wendell like puts a hand to the floor to start getting up, but does it so slowly that Paul Daley just steps in and punches him in the head as he's coming up, like bus driver uppercut, kind of like MVP took from Lima when he was on his knees. Wendell goes to the fence and he just swings on him. It was beautiful. It was really nice to see Paul Daley get a knockout in his last MMA fight. He got very emotional afterwards. Yeah, I mean, never one of the best in the world, but sort of robbed himself of the chance to improve in the UFC where people could see him by sucker punching Josh Koscheck. But to me, best moment, finest moment will always be being out-wrestled by John Fitch and booing Bellator, looking into the camera underneath John Fitch and be like, boo, boo, this is what you want, Scott Coker. Aren't these exciting fights? But Scott Coker used to love throwing him under the bus. There was a period where Paul Daley fought Rory McDonald, John Fitch, Douglas Lima, and Lorenz Larkin in the space of about a year and a half. And MVP had fought soup cans. And Scott Coker's going out there and going, well, Paul Daley doesn't want anything to do with MVP. And you're going, he's fought every good fighter you have. Why would he be scared of MVP? And then they did have to fight, and Paul Daley tried to be clever with him and wrestle. It just made the worst fight ever. Another questionable decision. And then there was an interesting fight between Kana Watanabe and Denise Kiholtz. But that was about it for this week. So I'm going to fill up the rest of the time with some rapid-fire questions from Twitter. Combat Chronicles, your boy Kyle, he says, non-MMA related, who's going to win, Tenshin or Takeru? This is coming up in like a month, or maybe less. It is June that fight's going off. Tenshin has looked bad lately, but Takeru is all offense, and Tenshin does pretty well when guys just come after him. The first couple of rounds against Rodtang, he was really bashing him and leaving largely unscathed. When things got hard for him against Rodtang and, who was that Thai? The one he fought twice, but the first time he looked pretty shoddy in the later rounds as well. 5-round fights, not Tenshin's favourite. Problem is, this fight is only 3 rounds, apparently, which, it's going to cost them $1 million or whatever, or $2 million, and they're paying for 9 minutes of action. Classic Sakakibara. And this week or last week, it came out that he's being blackmailed by a journalist for talking to the Yakuza on tape or some shit like that. Just going back to the old hymn. How'd your last venture into MMA fall apart, Sakakibara? Oh, scandal because I was involved with the Yakuza. How's the current one going, mate? I want Takeru to win. I worry about him getting cracked with the open side counters coming in. And I also worry that, I could see him running Tenshin ragged and Tenshin hating that, because Tenshin, a lot of his answer to aggression is to land the good big punch and then run out the side door. And if you keep that up on him, he's basically sprinting around the ring. But doing that inside 3 rounds and benefiting from it is real tricky, because you're only going to get, the 3rd round where he's tired. Whereas if you've got a 5-round fight, you've got 3, 4, 5 where you can just batter him. And he'll be taking breathers, he'll be hitting takedowns, he'll be doing the rolling thunder and laying on the floor for 30 seconds. I don't know if you can tell, I'm getting ready to be disappointed by this one. Tyler says, do you think the MMA meta will eventually evolve to a point that it levels out stylistically and becomes essentially its own melting pot, pigeon martial art? And Dagestani wrestler meme notwithstanding, what would that look like? I think, due to train MMA without a background in other martial arts now. Anyway, that's the meta, being able to cage wrestle, having decent striking, decent grappling, no submissions on the ground or anything, but lots of get-ups. And I think with MMA gyms, that's, places that have sprung, well, not places that sprung up. Anyone who succeeds to a good level trains at a good MMA gym, but a lot of them still come in from different martial arts. And I think as long as different martial arts exist, and I know that it's not supposed to be that way, I'm supposed to go, look, we know what works, it's MMA. But as long as different martial arts exist, even the bullshit ones, you'll have people coming in with different backgrounds and perspectives and bring in different styles to the table. If everyone starts training the same from the beginning, same things are going to be prioritized and so on. And you won't get the Raymond Danielses, bad example. You won't get the Stephen Wonderboy Thompsons, the Israel Adesanyas, the Charles Oliveira's, the people with the strange skill sets that break away from what should happen in any given engagement. And I think it really helps that in MMA, because there's so much that people can do, it's almost impossible to learn how to do everything. You know, watch someone like Amanda Ribas throwing the back kick 4 times around or whatever it was. But, you know, guys who get really good at one thing that's weird can really surprise much better fighters on paper, or much more textbook fighters. Ghost of Keck says, how much longer does the UFC milk McGregor for pay-per-view buys? He's in such a strange spot because he basically ruined his life by earning more money in one night than anyone ever can offer him again. There is no point in him having earned like $100 million in one night against Floyd Mayweather, and then presumably some of it is invested somewhere, making money for him. And he's got, proper number 12 or whatever it is, which apparently Irish people still love drinking. But the UFC cannot offer him money to interest him at this point. You know, I think he got like 15, 20 million alleged, because this is all alleged because the UFC payment system is so opaque. But even then, how do you motivate yourself to come back and fight like Nate Diaz or even like a real contender or someone like that? If you're not getting a title fight, which is what he wants all the time, and he's not good enough to just jump into it, especially not at lightweight. He was amazing at featherweight, but he had that amazing run of wins, and then he met Jose Aldo and knocked him out. Then he took one fight at lightweight, happened to be a horrible stylistic matchup for the champion, but never did anything else at lightweight. There's nothing else that he can rest his hat on at lightweight. So jumping back into a title shot is just, he's just going to get murked. Maybe he's seeing someone like Oliveira who gets hurt so often, and saying like, oh yeah, no, maybe I could come in and get that title again. But how much can you genuinely motivate yourself to do that for $15 million or whatever when you're worth 120 or something like that? I know this goes against my like pay fighters properly, stop being like, oh, they need to be hungry, but the obscene amount of money he made and the money that he's returning to, which is still crap even though the UFC pays him out the arse, just says to me that this guy is going to take like maybe one more fight, 2 more fights. Maybe he hangs around saying he's going to fight forever, but I can't see him. He's never going to need to fight 3 times in a calendar year. He's never going to have to stay active. And all those things actually hurt his ability to compete. Hectic One Legend says, gay son or thought daughter? I think gay son, just because at least you don't think he's going to, you got the least chance of him ruining his life with a teenage pregnancy. Apostole says, is that Apostole? Yeah, Apostole says, it's been said that timing beats power, but can timing be learned, and how would one train for its improvement? Yeah, timing can be learned. Learn how to run away from people and get them stepping into you. I mean, that's very, very basic, but that's all Machida does. And in a sense, that's all Dominic Cruz does. It's not quite the same, but you just get people following you, and then you can watch them take that extra step for you. Now, timing in the pocket, timing when you're actually in range with someone and you have to use your eyes and stuff, is a bit different. But for learning what timing is, definitely just leading people around the ring and trying to intercept them. To me, timing, I mentioned this the other day, but I think it was Jaden Cox said it in some instructional I was watching, but he said, if you can see it, it's too late. That's gone. If you're fighting someone good, they know. You got to be able to feel it. You got to know what's coming. And by know what's coming, think of something like the Giggler sweep in jiu-jitsu. Obviously, Mansour Barnui has managed to Giggler sweep a load of guys into top position, which is unheard of in top-level grappling. But someone like Gordon Ryan or Craig Jones will use the Giggler sweep to get the underhook, because they know when they hit the Giggler sweep, the guy will put his hand on the floor momentarily and open up the underhook. And you have to know that that's going to happen, so you do the Giggler sweep with the intention of getting the underhook. You don't do the Giggler sweep, watch him post his arm and go, okay, well, I can have the underhook at least. That's what timing is. Or that's one example of what timing is, because you can try and react to things, which takes really good reactions, or you can try and set things up and time what you know is coming, because the guy has to do that. If you make the guy circle around to your left along the ropes or fence, you can back kick him. It's creating certainties or close to certainties, because reacting to things is very, very tiring and tricky and goes wrong a lot. Ross says, are you watching the sumo? 4 or 5 in with a shout in this one. I haven't watched the last couple, actually. The Fight Record says, do you believe it will be possible for MMA to adopt the Moneyball statistics-led approach becoming popular in other sports? Will machines one day dream of Vicente Luque style electric left hooks. I'm always saying this, but you cannot moneyball MMA. There's too many factors. There's too much. I do believe that looking at statistics and things can be very educational, but you got to look at them and interpret them. And the interpretation is where it's lost on a lot of people, because it's very easy to say, well, an example would be like Ray F. Carson looked at what scored for the bottom man the most in wrestling from referee's position. And if you just did a basic study and you said switches, Granbys, things like that, that would be one thing. But he worked out that almost everything worked better off the stand-up. So the stand-up failing first, statistically, that's like, why would you even try the stand-up? But noticing that something else succeeded after it is the important part, at a higher rate than if you just hit it from your knees or whatever. Same thing in MMA. I've just talked about it in that article this week. I've just talked about it in this episode. But leg attacks, rather, if you look at them on how many are finished, they're shit. If you look at them on what they actually do, they're much more significant. MMA Freak says, is Mazzagatti a better ref than Big John is a commentator? Yes, Big John is the worst commentator who's ever lived. El Hopanas Rom Tick says, fighter with the worst skill set / fighting ability that managed to reach high-level success. Maybe someone like Betch Kohaya? It's got to be women's MMA, and it's got to be someone who, like, struck or took advantage. Actually, no, because then you're taking advantage of even worse striking of other high-level strikers, or fighters, rather, in that division. I don't know. Pat says, looking at Do Bronx's success, is the Muay Thai stance / weapon something that could become meta in MMA? If the fighter has a strong ground game, of course. Yeah, why not? Why not? I think lightening the lead leg, generally, not a bad idea, because more and more the calf kick is a problem, more than just like a naked shot. And guys are getting better at wrestling. Guys are starting wrestling earlier. They're wrestling against better wrestlers, so they're not so worried about just getting blast doubled off their feet all the time. Really now, good takedowns are, 1, against the fence, 2, countering as like a level change reactive double, and 3, you'll see guys going into like singles and stuff. It's very rarely just Brock Lesnar running through someone. Now, obviously, if you're fighting Brock Lesnar, you've got different problems, but I think there's certainly going to be more malleability in people's stances in future. It's like how you're seeing so many more side-on stances. Not everyone is standing square with both feet planted, ready to just throw their hips back. Jay Dilla the Killer says, why do most guard players in MMA seem to suck, or at least have poor fight IQ? Is it overconfidence in the guard, lack of understanding judging criteria, or an apprehension to stand and bang? I think losing sight of the trinity, submit, stand, sweep. And it's very easy to get stuck working 2 of those, or the sweep and the submit, or the stand, and get lost in that. If you watch guys who are really good at it, like Ricardo Lamas is one who I always shout out, but he did about 3 things on the ground just from that one reverse knee shield position, the get the fuck up guard. And he threatened a sweep overhead. He's threatened a guillotine, which he actually caught Charles Oliveira with from that exact position. And he swept him while he was doing it. And he threatens the stand up the entire time. Real minimalist in terms of number of techniques, but the three core principles are covered. Anyone who's playing like closed guard for any length of time, typically missing, especially the stand part of that formula. They're waiting to like open their legs, shrimp out, get to a hip and a hand and stand up. Whereas you watch someone like Charles Oliveira, he'll throw up arm bars and roll to his knees, missing them, which was a Greg Jackson favourite, actually. Right, I reckon that'll do us today. Not great fights, but at least we got a Holly Holm main event coming up at the weekend.
Bruh.
I'm your boy Jack Slack. If you want to become a Patreon, get in on 2 podcasts a week, plus post-fight article, plus advanced striking when I do them. Sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, be a boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Alexander Rakic out of the title picture for a little while, at least, bless.